Hello, welcome to another briefing. So in this briefing, I'm going to start out with the satellite per usual, and we are going to, first thing we're noticing here is just going through the day yesterday, and then into the evening hours here, you can see a couple different things actually. You have a cold front just to the north, basically to the north of the Pacific Northwest. Um, Keeping some cooler air. This is essentially a trough in the jet stream right here. It's gonna keep a cooler pattern in the Pacific Northwest. Relatively cooler. I mean, it'll be warm, but just not as warm as further south because what we have, the main story, what we have right now is this building heat dome, big center of high pressure aloft. It's going to be today pretty much centered right over the southern Nevada into southern California and western Arizona area over here is going to be centered, the big center of the high. Have a big dry hole here because you have a lot of sinking air. It's really hard for you to get any moisture in there for you to get storms to form, but then you have around the high pressure system just to the north and to the east, you're seeing quite a bit of thunderstorm activity over the Intermountain West as you have that moisture kind of wrapping around the high, wrapping around that dry hole. You're going to have showers and thunderstorms on the edges of that, particularly on the eastern edge in this case, because it seems like the high pressure is pretty strong here on the west side, and we're just not getting much of that south flow anymore. We had this a couple weeks ago. We had more of a south flow here over California, which was bringing plenty of subtropical moisture. But as you can see, um, it's more of an east flow over Southern California because we were going clockwise around the high. And because the high is a little further west, the flow is going to be more out at the east instead of the south. So I'm not going to be getting a lot of that subtropical moisture for the next few days. It's going to be just very hot and dry over these areas, particularly Southern California, Nevada, Arizona. You guys under the gun. Even here in Northern California, where I am, it is expected to get pretty hot, particularly for inland areas. The coast will probably be spared because of the there will be a light onshore wind at the coast. Will keep the coast cooler. Different than those early fall systems when we get offshore wind all the way to the coast, wiping out that marine layer. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like it's going to be quite that situation this time, although it could still get a little bit warm at the coast. Now, zooming into the Bay Area, this is where I focus since this is where I'm based. And you can see those stratus clouds just barely reforming yesterday morning and then mixing out pretty quickly when those relatively light winds didn't have a lot of onshore wind yesterday. We had some, but the winds were also a little bit out of the northwest, which is a slightly offshore wind, and it can mix down drier air from up aloft down to the surface, and it seems like that's exactly what happened yesterday. I want to notice something here as we go through just about the sunset hours. Look at that fire breaking out, the Woodside fire along the northern Sonoma coast here. And when you look at the smoke plume here, you can kind of notice right where the fire is right here. it's sort of a north. You see that northwest wind because you see the fires being pushed this way. For some areas, that is an offshore wind. Like right here, that is an offshore wind. Down here, it turns to a slightly onshore wind. But still, just slightly. But looking at the smoke footprint here, you can clearly see that northwest wind direction. I think that's just a very interesting feature. It's neat to be able to show that because you can really get a picture of what the wind is doing just by looking at the satellite image here. And unfortunately, you can see that smoke as we go into the evening hours spreading into places like Santa Rosa, like Petaluma, just spreading down the Petaluma Valley, even into Novato, into Napa. You can see this is right before the sun goes down. And you can see here this, unfortunately, the smoke plume just spreading in. I'm gonna highlight it over here. See right here. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to do an arrow. There's that smoke plume right there, and it's spreading out this way because of that onshore wind. Get more of a sea breeze push as the evening goes on, and that's exactly what happened. And so, unfortunately, you had that smoke. You still have that smoke into the overnight hours up there. Thankfully, southern Marin has been spared because the wind did turn more out of the west, but if we get more northwest wind today, that could be an issue. It would be something to watch because that smoke could spread further south. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some computer model guidance. Now that we've looked at the current conditions and kind of gotten an idea of what's going on, I'm going to look at what's projected to happen. I'm going to show two different computer models, and I'll take all of this with a grain of salt because computer model guidance is just guidance. It's not a forecast. It's not telling you what is going to definitely happen. It's telling you based on the conditions we have now what these computer models are projecting will likely happen over the next few days. With that said, out of the way, with that said, you notice this big heat dome. There's that big high pressure shifting right over to Southern California here. This is for the 5 p.m. hour on Friday, the 31st of July. And you can see here, Euro on the left, GFS American model on the right, and you can see, at least for Friday afternoon, both models in pretty good agreement with that big upper high center of the heat dome right over southwestern California, Arizona, even into parts of New Mexico, southern Nevada, southern Utah, into southwestern Colorado. Pretty strong heat dome there. Just highlighting, you can see on both computer model projections. And so that's some pretty big heat. Starts on Friday for a lot of areas. And Thursday was already pretty warm for some areas, but Friday I would say is pretty much day one of the major heat wave here expected for the inland areas. And then as we go into Saturday afternoon, still hasn't budged much. Still a really strong ridge of high pressure, sinking air, compressing air, very warm conditions. Honestly, as you can see, that trough digging into the East Coast, much cooler conditions for the Midwest and for the East Coast as that ridge builds out west. Because where you have a ridge, you have a trough somewhere downstream, and that's what's happening when you look at the U.S. right now. Ridging out west, troughing out east. You actually have a little bit of troughing in the Pacific Northwest as well. That is literally saving them from this big heat, at least for this weekend. And that cool trough sliding there to the north as this big heat dome intensifies over California as we go into Sunday afternoon. You start to see that that big heat dome kind of breaking up a little bit, kind of flattening out. It gets pushed just enough by the trough, but it's not going to be below average by any means. It'll still be hot. It'll still be above average. It might be not quite as excruciatingly hot as we go into early next week as that ridge sort of flattens a little bit, but then both models in agreement with that ridge re-intensifying. And see, look at that. And Pacific Northwest could be under the gun for some heat next week, because look at that ridge trying to build north. And this is where we start to have some model disagreement. That's why it's important to look at different models and kind of assess, okay, what's going on? What do I think makes sense here? Because the Euro wants that big high kind of still more centered to the south, more of a zonal kind of westerly flow. Maybe average temperatures or closer to average for parts of the Pacific Northwest. However, the GFS, different story. Okay, compared to the Euro, which has more of like a zonal flow. Here's the jet stream here. See how that's kind of flat? Now the GFS, look at this. Bulky ridge here. The GFS wants to spike that ridge into the Pacific Northwest. That could be more significant heat for them. This is something to watch. See, the Euro is more, how would I say this? The Euro is a little less aggressive on the heat for next week into the Pacific Northwest. Keeps it a little further south. GFS kind of wants to budge. It wants to build it into the Pacific Northwest because it wants a little deeper of a trough offshore here, and as a result that kind of spikes up that ridge, and you have a bit of a trough, a little deeper of a trough in the northern plains here as well, which is actually going to feel really good for them because parts of Montana could be like around 100 today, but by early next week maybe only in the 70s, so that's going to feel really good for them. But meanwhile, this is something to watch. So let's look at a third model. Let's look at the Canadian model. See if that's more in line with the Euro or the GFS. And it's, I want to say this is a little more in line with the GFS. See this bulkiness in the height lines here? When you see this kind of bulging here in these height lines, see this kind of bulging pattern? That's ridging right there. That's warm air surging north. So that is something to watch. I'm keeping a close eye on that because this heat could go into the Pacific Northwest as well. And in the Pacific Northwest, very few people have air conditioning because usually it's not needed. But in recent years, we've had more and more of these extreme heat events, and when you have heat like this, prolonged heat for several days, and you don't have air conditioning, that's when it gets dangerous for vulnerable people, vulnerable pets. Just had a really bad heat wave in France last month, and over 1,000 people died, and that's just deaths that are accounted for that were able to be directly linked to the heat, because a lot of people have pre-existing conditions that can get exacerbated by the heat, and that can also cause death. So that's something to be aware of. And so that's why I'm watching that so closely. And yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to keep an eye on this. I mean, the European eventually brings another trough into the Pacific Northwest later next week, but I mean, look at that. Look at it building that heat over California again, and this could become a little bit of a coastal heat wave depending on what plays out here. I'm going to show you what I mean. See, this would be early Monday morning, and this trough over Idaho right here, that could give us in the Bay Area a brief little burst of offshore wind, because when we have on the backside, I'm not going to get too technical about this, but on the backside of the trough, To put it shortly, you usually have high pressure at the surface because you have air rushing in to this area of spin here in the vortex. And as air is rushing in there, it's converging to accelerate. And when it does that, you get high pressure. You get convergence aloft, you get air sinking at the surface, so you have high pressure. And when you get high pressure set up like this, with lower pressure down here, the wind is going to flow. It's going to be a north, slightly northeast wind. That can bring heat down the mountains all the way to the coast. So that is something to watch. Now, this isn't very strong. This isn't like what we get in the early fall. So I'm not overly concerned about this, but it could mean some pretty warm weather all the way to the coast, even Sunday and Monday. Maybe 80s at the coast. Do I think it'll hit 90 at the coast? Probably not. Not with this pattern, not with this weak trough. If this were a deeper trough, if we had more offshore wind with that warm air mass overhead, sure. The way it is now, I don't think it's going to be extreme for the coast, but it's something to watch. It's something to keep an eye on. If we get a burst of offshore flow, that could change that typical coolness that we get around the coast, because that would wipe out the marine layer and the sea breeze. Now, let's just take a quick look at projected high temperatures. We'll start out with the general picture of the west. You can see here Pacific Northwest. Seattle's still comfortable, 83 for Friday. Portland's starting to heat up, 90. But still relatively comfortable. You go further down to Sacramento, you're looking at 100. You go down to the Bakersfield area, 102, and you're looking at some of these deserts in the Southern California area here. It was just ridiculous readings, well into the 100 teens. Palm Springs area, probably 116. Immediate coastline for Southern California going to be around 80. But just a little bit inland, you're looking at downtown LA probably in the upper 90s, 98 for downtown LA, I believe is what's showing here. You go not far at all from the coast, just a few miles, and you're talking extreme heat. Here's Saturday, you're looking at some nice cooling for the Pacific Northwest. That next trough moving in, look at only 74 Seattle, 76 Portland. That's going to feel so good for them compared to Sacramento baking well into the hundreds. I mean, look at these 100 teens. Look at 120 even starting to occur in some areas of Southern California. Maximum value here of this projection, 125. That's probably in the Death Valley area right here. No wonder it's called Death Valley, right? So, yeah. Pretty intense heat. I mean, you're looking at Nevada, widespread hundreds. For the low elevations, same thing with Utah. 102 for Grand Junction, Colorado. Mind you, that's about 5,000 feet elevation. It's not that common to hit 100 there. It can happen a few times a year, but that's pretty hot for the mountainous regions of Colorado. I mean, Telluride, almost 10,000 feet elevation, is expecting 71. I think it could be even a little warmer than that, based on what I've observed in my visits to Telluride and what I know about how these models tend to underdo the temperature sometimes. I mean, yeah, downright hot for much of the Intermountain West. And then here's Sunday, you start to see that cold front making a push through the northern states here. You can see that line with the cooler air here trying to move in. Not chilly by any means, but for July standards, this is comfortable. It's very comfortable. Looking at 70s. Even the warmest areas of eastern Washington and Oregon only getting into about 80. Only upper 70s for places like Spokane in July. That's pretty impressive. Now, down south, unfortunately, more heat. Sunday, this would be day 3 of this intense heat for a lot of areas, especially in the desert southwest. It's going to be baking. And then here we go, Monday, more cooling up north, maybe a little bit of a rebound for the Pacific Northwest, but look at Montana, going from 105 on Saturday to freaking upper 70s on Monday. And then let's go zoom in a little more to the Bay Area for the next few days here, just to give a more localized view. I mean, Bay Area, they're looking at maybe upper 60s for the coolest spots on the coast, mostly 70s coast, upper 70s to about 80 for the Bayside areas. And then you go further inland over the hills and you have temperatures well into the 90s. Wouldn't surprise me if we get close to 100 in some of the hottest inland spots for the Bay Area. Sacramento could be about 100 today. Look at tomorrow, into the low hundreds for the Sacramento area. Mid to upper 90s inland Bay Area, probably around 80 for most of the Bayside. Coastal areas starting to get into the low 70s. One exception would probably be maybe the Tip of Point Rays, but it looks like most coastal areas actually start to warm up quite a bit. I'm going to Sunday, same kind of thing. That's day 3 though of this heat for a lot of areas. That's where it starts to get really, really uncomfortable, especially if you don't have AC. Monday, maybe some slight relief. You can see maybe a little cooler for some coastal areas there. Still pretty damn oppressive. If you're inland, pardon the heavier language, but it's just gonna be that bad. It's gonna be that hot. I mean, looking at these projections, the National Weather Service, ridiculous values, 104, 105-ish for the Sacramento area on Monday. And then maybe down to 100 on Tuesday, maybe down to the upper 90s on Wednesday. You start to see a little more of an onshore push. Could have a return of the sea breeze, especially as we go Tuesday into Wednesday. Because if we're looking at the longer range pattern here, that's where you see that ridge flattening out a little bit. Could allow the onshore wind to return, especially if when that trough over the northern plains pushes further east. You don't have high pressure out there anymore. You have the pressure lowering inland. You have more of an onshore wind that returns. Probably not going to be very strong, but it'll probably be just enough to cool the coastal areas back into the 60s, cool Bayside areas back into the 80s, upper 70s maybe. Cool the further inland spots like Livermore, Santa Rosa, maybe back to 90 instead of the upper 90s. It'll be some relief. Sacramento, of course, still around 100. And we'll have to keep an eye on what happens after that because we're looking a ways out. But anyways, this was a long one, so thank you for staying. If you stayed this long, I hope you're able to get something out of this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.